Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Economics channel. Tonight, our theme is the coin itself, a small, cold disc of metal that has carried the weight of empires, the way a single ember can hold the memory of an entire fire long after the flames have gone quiet. Money in its earliest forms is one of the oldest inventions of human trust, older than most nations, older than most religions, stretching back through the long, patient centuries where strangers first learned to believe in something they could hold in their palm. Every civilization we will drift through tonight, from ancient riverbanks to distant mountain mines, found its own quiet way of saying, "I trust you," without ever needing to speak the words aloud. If this kind of slow, wandering history helps you unwind, consider leaving a like, subscribing, or leaving a gentle comment below. It truly helps this little channel keep going. For now, let your shoulders soften, let your breathing slow, and let your thoughts drift loose from the day behind you. Let's begin. Long before the first coin was ever struck, entire villages traded without any money at all, trusting only memory and neighborly goodwill. In small farming communities, a family with extra grain might simply hand it to a neighbor in need, trusting that help would return someday in another form, perhaps wool, perhaps labor, perhaps nothing at all. But barter had a quiet flaw. It only worked if two people happened to want exactly what the other had. A fisherman with too much fish and no need for pottery could wait a long, hungry while for the right stranger to pass through. This is what makes the earliest economies so quietly fascinating, because long before coins existed, human beings were already solving the oldest puzzle of trust. Cattle once served as one of humanity's oldest currencies, their value so deeply understood that ancient words for money and cattle became almost the same word. In many early societies, a family's wealth was counted not in coins, but in the soft lowing of animals grazing at the edge of a field. A dowry might be paid in cattle, a debt settled in cattle, a fine for wrongdoing measured in the number of animals owed. Yet cattle were heavy, slow, and impossible to divide neatly for a small purchase. You could not hand someone half a cow for a smaller favor. Even so, this early idea, that value could be stored in something living and breathing, quietly foreshadowed everything coins would later become. Salt once carried so much value across the ancient world that soldiers were sometimes paid with it directly. Traveling merchants carried salt across deserts and mountain passes, trading it for gold, cloth, and grain, because in a world without refrigeration, salt meant survival through the long winter months. Entire caravan routes across Africa were built almost entirely around this single white mineral. A merchant who lost his salt to bandits could lose an entire fortune in a single afternoon. Even the word for a soldier's wage in some ancient languages quietly echoes the word for salt itself. It is a gentle reminder that value has never lived only in gold. Sometimes it lived in something as ordinary as the seasoning on a family's table. Tiny cowrie shells, gathered from warm ocean shallows, once traveled thousands of miles to become currency in lands that had never seen the sea. Merchants carried baskets of these small, pale shells from the Indian Ocean coastline deep into inland Africa and across ancient Asia. Their glossy curve and consistent size made them easy to count, easy to string together, and remarkably hard to fake. Yet their value depended entirely on scarcity, and when European traders later flooded markets with shiploads of cheap shells, their worth quietly collapsed, unraveling economies that had depended on them for generations. It is a soft, sobering lesson. that even the most beautiful currency is only as strong as the trust placed carefully around it. In ancient Mesopotamia, long before coins existed, grain itself functioned as an early form of money. Temple officials kept careful records of barley owed and barley paid, pressing symbols into soft clay with a reed stylus. These clay tablets, some small enough to fit in a palm, are among the oldest financial records ever discovered by archaeologists. A farmer might owe grain to a temple storehouse, and that debt could be transferred, like an early promise passed quietly from hand to hand. In many ways, these clay tablets were the ancestors of paper money, centuries before anyone thought to press an image into metal. Trust, it seems, has always needed some small object to lean against. Long before coins, some Mesopotamian temples issued small clay tokens shaped like tiny jars, sheep, or bundles of grain. Each shape quietly represented a specific good, allowing merchants to trade promises rather than hauling heavy goods across the city. Archaeologists have found thousands of these tokens sealed inside clay envelopes, a kind of ancient receipt meant to prevent tampering. If the token inside didn't match the mark outside, a dispute could be settled without argument. It is a gentle, remarkable thought that 4,000 years before modern banking, someone had already imagined the sealed envelope, the verified promise, the quiet contract between strangers. Before coins carried standard value, many ancient peoples traded metal simply by weighing it on small handheld scales. A merchant might carry silver in irregular lumps or rings, cutting off a sliver to match the price of goods. This system, sometimes called hack silver, meant that value lived not in a stamped image, but in the honest weight of the metal itself. Disputes were common, since a dishonest trader could shave a coin's edge or mix in cheaper metal. Slowly, this need for trust without deception planted the very idea that would one day give birth to the coin, a promise of weight guaranteed by a mark. Obsidian, a glassy black volcanic stone, sharp enough to cut like a blade, once traveled hundreds of miles along ancient trade routes long before any coin existed. Early toolmakers prized it so highly that pieces mined in one region have been found, centuries later, in settlements far beyond any single tribe's territory. Traders passed it hand to hand through quiet mountain paths, each exchange built on nothing but reputation and the memory of a fair deal. There was no mint, no stamp, no guarantee beyond a trader's word. And yet, somehow, this fragile web of trust held firm for generations, long before anyone imagined pressing a promise into silver. Amber, warm and golden, carried from the cold shores of the Baltic Sea, once traveled a trade route so long it stretched across an entire continent. Roman nobles prized this fossilized resin for jewelry, paying handsomely for pieces that had drifted for centuries inside ancient sap before hardening into stone. Merchants moved it southward along quiet forest paths and river crossings, trading it onward long before it reached the Mediterranean coast. No single coin financed this journey, only a long chain of individual, human agreements. It is a soft reminder that trade itself is often older than the money used to measure it. In some of history's most distant early trade encounters, two groups who shared no common language exchanged goods without ever meeting face to face. One side would leave goods on a riverbank or open shore, then withdraw and wait quietly at a distance. The other side would arrive, examine the offering, leave what they judged a fair trade in return, and depart just as silently. Historians call this silent barter, a fragile agreement built entirely on unspoken honesty. No coin, no contract, no shared words, only the quiet hope that trust could survive without language. This is what makes early trade so hauntingly beautiful, long before money gave it a simpler shape. In the ancient kingdom of Lydia, in what is now Western Turkey, the very first true coins were struck from a pale natural alloy of gold and silver called electrum. These small lumps of metal, stamped with the crude image of a lion's head, were among the earliest objects designed specifically to be currency and nothing else. Before this, metal had always been weighed and measured individually for every single trade.
Now, for the first time, a stamped mark meant the weight and purity were already promised.
It was a quiet revolution. Value no longer needed to be proven each time, only trusted once, in the stamp itself. King Croesus of Lydia, whose very name became a byword for wealth, is remembered for refining coinage into something remarkably close to what we still recognize today. Under his rule, Lydian mints began separating gold and silver into pure, standardized coins, rather than the inconsistent electrum alloy used before. This meant a merchant no longer had to guess at a coin's true value. Pure gold coins and pure silver coins each carried a clear, dependable worth. Even so, wealth built on gold could not protect a kingdom from conquest, and Croesus's own reign would end in defeat. It is a quiet, sobering thought that even the richest king in coinage's early story could not coin his own safety. The earliest Lydian coins bore the simple image of a roaring lion facing a small, quiet sun, a design chosen not for decoration, but for recognition. Illiterate traders across the ancient world could not read inscriptions, but they could recognize a familiar stamped image at a glance. This lion mark became a kind of silent signature, a promise that the metal beneath it had been tested and approved by royal authority. Counterfeiters, of course, soon tried to imitate the mark, forcing mints to refine their designs further. Even in its very first years, coinage was already engaged in this quiet, endless dance between trust and deception. What made early Lydian coins so revolutionary was not the metal itself, but the idea of a guaranteed, standardized weight, something no civilization had fully offered before. A merchant traveling from one town to another no longer needed his own scale, his own trusted eye, his own private judgment of a metal's purity. Instead, he needed only to trust the stamp, a single mark standing in for an entire chain of verification. This idea would spread with startling speed once neighboring Greek cities across the Aegean coast began adopting it for themselves. It is a quiet marvel how one small stamped disc could carry so much invisible agreement. Coinage spread quickly from Lydia into the nearby Greek cities of Ionia, where local mints began striking their own silver and electrum pieces. Each city chose its own symbol: an owl, a tortoise, a bee, turning coins into tiny emblems of civic identity as much as economic tools. A trader could recognize, just by glancing at a coin's design, which distant city had minted it and what reputation that mint carried. Some cities built strong reputations for honest coinage, while others gained quiet notoriety for debasing their metal. Even in these earliest years, a coin was never only money. It was also a small, portable promise about where it came from. Temples in the ancient Greek world often played a surprising role in early coinage, acting almost like the first trusted banks. Priests oversaw the storage of precious metal, and sometimes minted coins themselves, lending their sacred reputation to back the currency's honesty. A coin struck under a temple's watchful authority carried extra confidence, since few merchants dared risk offending the gods by tampering with sacred metal. Yet even temples were not immune to the pressures of war and debt, and some eventually melted down their own treasures to fund conflict. It is a quiet human thought that even sacred trust could bend beneath the weight of necessity. A coin, at its heart, was never really about metal. It was about trust, made small enough to fit inside a closed hand. Before coinage, every trade required two strangers to somehow agree, in that very moment, on fairness and value. A coin allowed that agreement to happen once, at the mint, and then travel silently through hundreds of hands afterward. Each person who accepted it was quietly trusting a promise made by someone they would never meet. This is what makes the coin so quietly remarkable, a tiny object that let trust outlive the person who first gave it. Almost as soon as coins existed, so did counterfeiters, eager to slip cheaper metal beneath a convincing stamped surface. Ancient forgers sometimes coated lead or bronze cores with a thin wash of silver, hoping a hurried merchant would never notice the difference. Some cities responded by cutting suspect coins in half, checking the metal color inside before allowing them back into circulation.
Discovered counterfeiters in many ancient societies faced punishments as severe as those for treason itself.
It is a quiet, uneasy echo across the centuries. Wherever trust becomes valuable, someone quietly learns to imitate it. Early coin makers often stamped a small, deep punch mark into the reverse side of a coin, a technique meant to prove the metal all the way through. This punch mark, sometimes just a rough geometric pattern, guaranteed that a coin wasn't merely plated on the surface. Merchants learned to check for this mark instinctively, the way a modern shopper might glance at a familiar brand's small printed seal. Without it, a coin's shine alone told a stranger nothing reliable at all. Trust, even in these earliest coins, always needed some small, deliberate proof behind the shine. Across the ancient Mediterranean world, archaeologists have quietly uncovered buried hoards of coins, hidden beneath floors or tucked into garden walls. Many of these hoards were likely buried during moments of war or sudden danger, their owners hoping to return once the danger passed. Some never did return, leaving their small fortunes sealed silently in the earth for over 2,000 years. When modern archaeologists finally lift these hoards free, the coins often still gleam faintly beneath centuries of soil. It is a quiet, haunting thought that somewhere beneath our own cities, small, silent fortunes may still be waiting, forgotten by time itself. In ancient Athens, the silver tetradrachm coin became so trusted across the Mediterranean that merchants far beyond Greece's borders willingly accepted it in trade. Stamped with the calm, wide-eyed image of an owl beside an olive branch, it became known simply as the owl coin. Its design changed so little over generations that other cities began minting convincing imitations, hoping to borrow its trusted reputation. Athens, unusually, tolerated many of these copies, since they only spread the city's influence further across foreign markets. It is a rare, quiet exception in coinage's history, a forgery tolerated because it flattered the very trust it borrowed. The owl on Athenian coins was never a decorative accident. It was the sacred bird of Athena, the city's patron goddess of wisdom. Pairing her owl with a gentle sprig of olive another symbol of the city's prosperity, gave the coin a quiet, unmistakable identity. A merchant docking at any distant port could recognize an Athenian owl coin at a glance, regardless of language or custom. This visual trust mattered enormously in a world where written contracts were rare and slow to verify. Even now, the owl remains one of history's most quietly enduring symbols of dependable value.
The silver behind Athens's famous owl coins was mined largely at Laurion, in mines worked under brutally harsh conditions by enslaved laborers.
Historical accounts describe cramped tunnels and grueling, dangerous labor, a difficult truth behind the city's shining wealth. This silver, however it was extracted, quietly funded much of Athens's rising power, including the fleet that helped defend Greece itself. It is a solemn thing to hold in mind, that even history's most celebrated coinage often rested on hidden human cost. We remember it honestly here, not to linger in detail, but to acknowledge the full, complicated weight behind every gleaming coin. Athenian silver, drawn from the mines at Laurion, did more than fill merchants' purses. It quietly financed one of history's most consequential navies. When silver reserves swelled unexpectedly, Athenian leaders chose to build warships rather than distribute the wealth directly among citizens. That fleet would later prove decisive in turning back a much larger invading force at sea. It is a quiet, striking thought that a handful of silver coins, multiplied by the thousands, helped determine the fate of an entire civilization's freedom.
When Alexander the Great swept across Persia and beyond, he carried coinage with him as deliberately as he carried his armies.
Newly conquered cities began minting coins bearing his image, spreading a single recognizable currency across a territory stretching from Greece to the edge of India. For the first time, a trader could carry the same silver coin from one end of a vast empire to the other. Yet such unity was fragile, and after Alexander's early death, his empire quickly fractured into rival successor kingdoms. Even coinage, it turns out, could not hold together what ambition alone had built. Before Alexander's era, most coins avoided showing a living ruler's face, favoring gods, animals, or symbols instead. After his death, his successors broke that quiet tradition, proudly stamping their own portraits onto coins as a bold declaration of power. This shift transformed coins into something new, small, portable pieces of political image-making, carried unknowingly into thousands of distant households. A coin no longer only promised value, it now promised loyalty, or at least visibility, to whoever ruled that year. It is a quiet turning point where money first became a stage for personal legacy. In ancient Sparta, city leaders deliberately chose heavy, clumsy iron bars as currency instead of gold or silver, precisely because they were so impractical. By making wealth difficult to hoard or transport, Spartan lawmakers hoped to discourage citizens from chasing luxury or foreign trade. A modest fortune in Spartan iron money might fill an entire room, useless for buying anything beyond their own borders. It is a quiet, almost stubborn philosophy, using money itself to resist the pull of money. Few societies in history have ever tried so deliberately to make wealth inconvenient on purpose. Rival Greek cities often competed quietly through their coinage, each trying to earn a reputation for honest, reliable silver. A city known for consistent purity could see its coins accepted eagerly across foreign markets, boosting trade far beyond its own walls. A city caught debasing its silver, mixing in cheaper metal to stretch its treasury further, risked merchants refusing its coins altogether. In this quiet way, coinage became an early test of a city's character, judged constantly by strangers who never set foot within its gates. Trust, once again, proved to be the real currency beneath every stamped disc. As larger empires eventually absorbed the old Greek city-states, the vibrant variety of individual civic coinage slowly faded into quieter uniformity.
Distinct local symbols, owls, tortoises, roaring lions, gave way gradually to the standardized portraits of distant emperors.
Something small but meaningful was lost in this shift. A certain local pride once carried quietly in every coin's design. Yet even as empires rose and fell around them, the basic idea those small Greek coins had proven, that trust could be stamped into metal, would never again disappear from human history. As Rome grew from a small city into a sprawling republic, its earliest money was startlingly simple. Heavy lumps of bronze weighed rather than stamped. Only gradually did Rome adopt true minted coins, borrowing ideas already proven successful across the Greek world to its south. By the time Rome became an empire, its coinage had grown into one of history's most far-reaching monetary systems. Yet this vast reach would eventually strain under the very weight of the empire it served. Even Rome's mighty coinage, in the end, would answer to the same quiet forces of trust and time as every coin before it. The silver denarius became the steady backbone of Roman daily life, the coin a soldier expected in his palm and a merchant expected at his stall. Its name would echo for centuries afterward, quietly surviving in words for money used across later European languages. A single denarius might buy a simple meal, while a soldier's daily wage was often measured in just a handful of them. Yet as Rome's expenses grew heavier through the centuries, the silver inside each denarius would quietly begin to shrink. Even the empire's most trusted coin could not entirely escape the slow pressure of imperial ambition. Roman legionaries were paid directly in coin, a practice that helped spread Roman currency to the very edges of the empire's frontier. Wherever a legion marched, along the Rhine, across North Africa, deep into Britain, Roman coins followed quietly in soldiers' pouches. Local markets near military camps often adapted quickly, learning to trust and accept this foreign metal in daily trade. In this way, an army built for conquest became, almost by accident, one of history's most effective currency distribution networks. Even war, it seems, could carry trust forward as easily as it carried a blade. Roman coins often carried small, deliberate marks identifying which mint had struck them, and sometimes which official had overseen the work. These moneyers, as they were called, staked their own reputation on the honesty of every coin bearing their mark. A dishonest moneyer risked severe punishment, since debased coinage threatened the trust of the entire empire's economy. Yet, as political pressures mounted in later centuries, even honest moneyers found themselves ordered to quietly stretch the silver thinner than before. It is a solemn thought, how even careful, personal accountability can bend beneath the weight of larger forces.
As Rome's 3rd century grew increasingly unstable, racked by war and rapid changes of emperor, its once trusted silver coinage began to visibly decline.
Mints, desperate to fund endless military campaigns, quietly reduced the silver content of each denarius year after year. What had once gleamed a rich, dependable silver slowly dulled toward a thin, disappointing gray. Merchants, sensing the shift, grew wary of coins whose true worth no longer matched their stamped promise. It is a quiet warning carried across 2,000 years that trust, once stretched too thin, does not easily return to its original shine. Faced with rising prices and crumbling trust in Roman coinage, Emperor Diocletian attempted something remarkably bold, an empire-wide edict fixing the price of goods. Bread, wool, and labor were all assigned official maximum prices, backed by the full authority of the state. Yet merchants, unable to profit at these fixed rates, simply withdrew their goods from public markets instead. The edict, meant to restore order, quietly deepened the very shortages it hoped to prevent. It is a gentle, timeless lesson that trust in money cannot easily be legislated back into existence once it has quietly slipped away. Roman emperors used coin portraits as one of history's earliest forms of mass communication, reaching citizens who would never see the emperor in person. A new ruler's face, freshly stamped onto silver and bronze, traveled instantly into markets across 3 continents. Victories, building projects, even religious shifts were often announced quietly through small symbols pressed onto a coin's reverse side. In an age without printing presses or broadcasts, a coin was sometimes the only image of power an ordinary citizen would ever hold. It is a quiet reminder that money and image have always traveled together, hand in hand.
Counterfeiting Roman coinage carried severe consequences, since forged currency directly threatened the empire's fragile economic trust.
Forgers sometimes cast fake coins from cheap alloys, coating them thinly to mimic silver's familiar shine. Roman authorities, when they caught such counterfeiters, punished them harshly, treating the crime almost as an act against the state itself. Even so, forged coins from this era still occasionally surface in archaeological digs today, quiet evidence of an ancient deception that nearly succeeded. Trust, it seems, has always required a firm hand standing quietly behind it. Along the remote edges of the Roman Empire, including near the windswept stones of Hadrian's Wall, archaeologists have uncovered buried caches of ancient coins. Soldiers stationed far from home may have buried their savings during moments of unrest, hoping to return for them later. Some hoards contain coins spanning many decades, suggesting careful, patient saving rather than a single sudden panic. Others were clearly buried in haste, coins scattered loosely rather than neatly stacked. Each hoard is a small, silent story of hope, interrupted quietly somewhere along the way. When the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed, its once vast coinage network unraveled along with it, fracturing into smaller, uncertain regional currencies. Trade routes that once carried standardized silver across 3 continents grew quieter, more local, more cautious. For a time, many communities across former Roman lands returned to older habits of barter and localized trust. It would take centuries for coinage across Europe to rebuild anything resembling the confidence Rome had once commanded. Even empires, it turns out, cannot make trust permanent, only lend it, for a while, to those who come after. Far to the east, ancient Chinese mints struck bronze coins in a distinctive round shape with a small square hole punched through the center. That square hole allowed coins to be strung together on a cord, making it easy to carry, count, and store large sums at once. A string of 1,000 coins became a standard unit of trade across Chinese markets for centuries. Carrying enough strings for a large purchase, however, could still be remarkably heavy and cumbersome. It is a quiet, practical genius, a coin designed not just to be valuable, but to be carried with ease. During China's Tang Dynasty, merchants facing the burden of heavy strings of coins developed an early form of paper credit note, nicknamed flying money. These lightweight certificates could be deposited in one city and redeemed for coin in another, sparing traders from hauling heavy metal across long distances. It was not yet true paper currency, but rather a clever bridge between coin and something entirely new. Even so, it planted a quiet seed, the idea that a piece of paper alone could represent real, trusted value. Sometimes the greatest inventions begin only as a convenience for tired travelers. It was during China's Song Dynasty that the world's first true government-backed paper currency finally emerged, centuries before Europe would attempt anything similar. Merchants in the region of Sichuan, weary of hauling heavy iron coins, began circulating printed notes backed by deposited reserves. The imperial government eventually took over this system directly, printing official paper money guaranteed by the state itself. Yet this innovation carried a quiet risk that would echo through every paper currency afterward. A promise printed on paper is only ever as strong as the trust standing quietly behind it. Song Dynasty officials soon discovered a tempting danger in paper money. Unlike coins, it could be printed in seemingly unlimited quantities. When later governments printed far more notes than their reserves could support, the value of each note began quietly sinking. Merchants, sensing the shift, demanded more and more paper for the same goods as prices climbed. It was one of history's earliest lessons in inflation, learned centuries before the word itself existed. Even paper, it turns out, obeys the same quiet law as every coin before it. Trust, once stretched too far, does not hold.
When the Venetian traveler Marco Polo journeyed through the vast Mongol Empire, he described something that startled him deeply: paper accepted everywhere as though it were solid gold.
Kublai Khan's government issued paper currency backed by the full authority of the Mongol state, punishable by death to refuse. Polo wrote of merchants across the empire trading freely with these thin printed notes, a concept almost unimaginable back in his native Europe. It would take Europe several more centuries to attempt anything resembling this system for itself. Sometimes an idea must travel across an entire continent before the rest of the world is finally ready to believe it. Early Chinese paper money was often produced from the soft inner bark of the mulberry tree, carefully pressed and dried into thin, durable sheets. Skilled artisans applied intricate printed designs, partly for beauty, but mostly to make forgery far more difficult to achieve convincingly. Each note carried official seals, layered patterns, and sometimes even subtle color mixtures that counterfeiters struggled to replicate. Despite these careful defenses, forged paper money still occasionally slipped quietly into circulation. Even on paper, it seems, the ancient contest between trust and deception continued without pause.
Counterfeiting paper money in Imperial China carried consequences far harsher than most coin forgery ever had, often punishable by death.
Officials understood that paper currency, unlike metal coin, carried no inherent value of its own beyond the government's promise behind it. A single successful forgery, left unchecked, threatened to quietly unravel that promise for an entire population. It is a solemn reminder that the less physical a currency becomes, the more fiercely its trust must be defended. Even centuries later, this quiet tension between convenience and vulnerability would return again and again. Paper currency spread only slowly westward from China, following trade routes across Central Asia over many patient generations. European travelers and merchants carried stories of it home long before their own governments dared attempt anything similar. It would take until the medieval and early modern periods for European banks to cautiously experiment with printed promissory notes of their own. Even then, many merchants remained deeply suspicious of paper, preferring the reassuring weight of real silver in hand. Trust, it seems, always travels more slowly than the idea it is meant to carry. Beneath every form of currency this world has ever known, shell, coin, or paper, lies the same quiet truth. Value was never really stored inside the object itself, but inside the shared belief that others would accept it in return. A coin is only heavy metal, and paper is only thin fiber, until a community silently agrees to trust it together. This is what makes the story of money so quietly remarkable, an invisible agreement, carried invisibly across thousands of years. Let that thought settle gently, like a stone sinking slowly beneath calm water, as we drift onward tonight. In the early centuries of Islam, the Caliph Abd al-Malik introduced a sweeping reform that reshaped coinage across a vast and growing empire. Rather than borrowing designs from Byzantine or Persian coinage, as earlier Islamic rulers briefly had, he ordered coins struck with elegant calligraphy alone. These gold dinars and silver dirhams carried no human portraits, only carefully inscribed verses and phrases, a deliberate religious choice. This aniconic style, avoiding images entirely, became a lasting signature of Islamic coinage for centuries afterward. It is a quiet reminder that a coin's design has always carried far more than economic meaning alone. The gold dinar, introduced under early Islamic rule, quickly became one of history's most trusted and widely circulated currencies. Its consistent weight and purity earned confidence across an enormous trading network stretching from Spain to the borders of India. Merchants of many different faiths and languages accepted the dinar readily, valuing its reliability above any political loyalty it might imply. Even rival kingdoms, wary of each other in every other respect, often accepted this same trusted gold coin in trade. Sometimes, it seems, a well-made coin can build bridges that treaties and armies cannot. Along the vast trading network we now call the Silk Road, camel caravans carried more than silk and spices. They carried coins from a dozen distant mints. A single caravan might pass through markets, accepting Persian silver, Chinese bronze, and Islamic gold within the same long journey. Merchants learned to judge unfamiliar coins quickly, weighing them by hand and checking their stamped marks for signs of trust. Disputes were common, yet somehow, trade continued across thousands of miles for centuries, without any single unifying currency. It is a quiet marvel how trust, patched together from a dozen directions, still managed to hold an entire continent's trade in balance.
Remarkably, archaeologists digging in Scandinavia have uncovered buried hoards containing thousands of Islamic silver coins, carried there centuries ago along Viking trade routes.
Norse traders traveled deep along Russian rivers, exchanging furs and amber for silver dirhams minted thousands of miles away in distant Islamic lands. These coins, prized for their reliable silver content, were sometimes melted down or worn as jewelry rather than spent directly. Their presence quietly reveals just how interconnected the medieval world truly was, long before anyone called it a global economy. Trust, it turns out, has always traveled farther than most people ever imagined. Common weight standards across the medieval Islamic world made trade remarkably smoother between distant, unfamiliar regions. A merchant in Cordoba could trust that a dinar minted in Baghdad carried nearly the same gold content as his own local coinage. This shared standard reduced the constant need for weighing and rechecking every coin at every single transaction. Where standards slipped, however, through debasement or local greed, trust quickly soured and trade slowed to a cautious crawl. It is a quiet lesson repeated throughout every century. Shared trust, once built carefully, makes the whole world faster and gentler to trade within. In the crowded bazaars of the medieval Islamic world, professional money changers sat quietly behind small tables, weighing and exchanging coins from dozens of distant lands. Their expertise let travelers convert unfamiliar foreign currency into something locally accepted, a service trusted enough to anchor entire market districts. Some money changers grew wealthy and respected enough to function almost like early bankers, holding deposits and issuing simple credit notes. Their reputation for honesty was everything, since a single dishonest transaction could ruin a money changer's standing for good. Long before modern banks, trust itself was already quietly being professionalized, one careful weighing at a time. The medieval world, though divided by faith, language, and distant borders, was tied together more tightly by trade than most people today remember. Coins minted in one civilization regularly crossed into another, carried by merchants who cared far more about honest weight than distant politics. A Viking trader, a Baghdad merchant, and a Byzantine official might never meet, yet their economies quietly touch through the same silver. It is a gentle, easily forgotten truth that trade has always been better at connecting humanity than borders have been at dividing it. Among traders along these ancient networks, informal codes of honesty often mattered more than any written law could enforce from a distant capital. A merchant known for fair dealing could travel confidently into unfamiliar markets, his reputation quietly preceding him from town to town. Word of a dishonest trader, likewise, could spread quickly enough to close markets against him for years afterward. In many ways, reputation itself functioned as its own quiet currency, as valuable as any coin in a trader's pouch. Trust, it seems, has always been the oldest and most patient currency of all. As the Western Roman Empire's unity dissolved, medieval Europe fractured into countless small kingdoms, each eager to strike its own local coinage. A single region might see coins minted by a local lord, a bishop, or a distant king, each carrying different weight and purity. Traveling merchants faced the exhausting task of constantly converting between dozens of competing currencies on a single journey. It is a quiet, tangled picture, an entire continent slowly rebuilding the trust that one great empire had once held together.
One of medieval Europe's quietest, most persistent crimes was coin clipping, the shaving of tiny slivers of silver from a coin's edge.
A patient clipper could gather a small fortune in stolen silver dust over months, while the coin itself still appeared roughly whole. Merchants grew wary of accepting worn or irregular coins, weighing them carefully before agreeing to any trade. Eventually, milled edges with fine ridged patterns were introduced specifically to make this quiet theft easier to detect. Even the smallest sliver of dishonesty, it turns out, could ripple quietly through an entire economy.
Medieval kings, desperate to fund wars or lavish courts, sometimes ordered their own mints to quietly reduce the precious metal inside each coin.
A coin that once contained mostly silver might, over a few troubled years, contained barely half that amount. Merchants, noticing the change, would raise their prices to compensate, and the entire kingdom's economy would quietly strain under rising costs. Debasement, again and again throughout history, proved a tempting shortcut for rulers and a quiet burden for everyone else. Trust, once thinned by a ruler's need, rarely returns to its original strength without great and patient effort. In response to widespread debasement, several medieval kingdoms undertook sweeping efforts known as great recoinages, replacing old, worn currency with fresh, standardized coins. These massive projects required enormous coordination, calling in old coins from across the realm and reminting them to a single trusted standard. For ordinary people, it meant a brief period of confusion as old, familiar coins vanished from daily use. Yet, in the long run, these efforts quietly restored confidence in a currency that had grown dangerously unreliable. Sometimes, rebuilding trust requires tearing down what came before it, patiently, piece by piece. Long before modern banks, medieval moneylenders operated quietly from small tables in market squares, offering loans against interest despite religious restrictions on the practice. Some built modest fortunes lending to merchants and nobles alike, becoming essential, if sometimes distrusted, figures in medieval economic life. Over time, these individual moneylenders evolved into more established banking houses, particularly across the trading cities of northern Italy. Their success, however, often stirred quiet resentment among those who viewed lending at interest as a moral failing. Even banking's earliest history carried this same tension between necessity and suspicion. The trading cities of medieval Italy, dense with merchants and maritime wealth, quietly gave birth to what we now recognize as modern banking. Wealthy merchant families began holding deposits, issuing loans, and even financing the ambitions of kings and popes across Europe. Their banking tables, called banco in the local language, would eventually lend their very name to the modern word bank itself. Yet lending to powerful rulers carried enormous risk, since a king's unpaid debt could bankrupt even the wealthiest banking family. Trust, once again, proved to be banking's most valuable and most fragile asset. One prominent banking family of Renaissance Italy built extraordinary influence through careful lending, patient diplomacy, and a network of trusted local branches across Europe. Their innovations in bookkeeping and cross-border credit quietly reshaped how merchants and rulers alike managed distant financial obligations. Yet even their vast fortune could not entirely shield them from the risks of lending to unpredictable rulers and shifting political winds. Their story is remembered less for any single coin they minted, and more for the quiet architecture of trust they built around lending itself. Even history's greatest banking dynasties, in the end, answered to the same fragile trust as any single coin. Among medieval banking's quiet innovations was the bill of exchange, a written promise allowing merchants to settle debts across distant cities without moving physical coin at all. A merchant in one city could pay a debt owed in another simply by presenting a trusted paper instrument, redeemable through a partner bank. This spared traders the danger and expense of transporting heavy gold across bandit-prone medieval roads. It also required an entirely new kind of trust, not in metal, but in a distant banker's honored word. Slowly, quietly, money was beginning to separate itself from the metal that had once defined it entirely. Religious teachings across much of medieval Europe forbade charging interest on loans, viewing the practice as a moral failing rather than fair compensation. Merchants and bankers, needing to profit from lending, quietly developed creative workarounds, disguising interest within fees, exchange rates, or delayed payment terms. Over centuries, these workarounds slowly softened rigid restrictions, paving a cautious path toward the banking practices we recognize today. It is a quiet reminder that human ingenuity, faced with a wall, usually finds some patient way around it. Trust and necessity, together, slowly reshaped even deeply held moral boundaries. Medieval craft guilds often held quiet but firm control over local trade and pricing, regulating everything from bread to woven cloth. Guild membership offered merchants a kind of trusted community reputation, vouching silently for the quality and honesty of their goods. This structure helped stabilize local economies, even as coinage itself fluctuated wildly from one troubled decade to the next. Yet guild control could also stifle competition, quietly limiting opportunity for those outside its trusted circle. Even without a single reliable coin, medieval communities found other patient ways to hold economic trust together. The devastating plague that swept across medieval Europe left behind a profound economic aftershock, reshaping labor and wealth for generations afterward. With so much of the population lost, surviving laborers found themselves suddenly able to demand higher wages than ever before. Landowners, desperate for workers to till their fields, were forced to quietly loosen the rigid feudal bonds that had held peasants in place for centuries. It is a solemn, complicated truth that even history's darkest tragedies sometimes reshaped economic trust in ways nobody could have predicted. We hold this thought gently, honoring its weight without lingering in its sorrow. Across the Atlantic, Spanish conquest of the New World unearthed silver deposits so vast that a single mountain would quietly reshape the entire world's economy. The silver mined from this mountain, struck into coins known as pieces of 8, would circulate as far away as China and colonial America. For nearly 3 centuries, this single Spanish coin functioned almost like an early global currency, trusted across continents and empires alike. Yet the human cost behind this silver mountain would remain, for centuries, a quiet and difficult truth beneath its shine. The mountain of Potosi, high in the Andes, produced silver so abundant that it quietly reshaped economies from Europe to Asia for generations. The labor extracting that silver, however, fell heavily upon indigenous workers forced into brutal and often deadly mining conditions. Historical records describe grueling shifts underground, a difficult truth that sits uneasily beneath the era's shining wealth. We acknowledge this honestly and briefly here, choosing not to linger in detail, but recognizing the full human cost behind history's silver. The Spanish silver dollar, minted from Potosi's abundant ore, became so widely trusted that it circulated freely across 5 continents for nearly 300 years. Merchants in Asia, Europe, and the Americas alike accepted this single coin, regardless of their own local currency or ruling government. Its reliable silver content made it a rare thing indeed, a currency trusted almost universally, long before any single global economy existed. Yet even this widespread trust could not shield it from counterfeiters eager to imitate its familiar, dependable shape. For a time, a single Spanish coin quietly held together trade across nearly the entire known world. Long before European coins arrived, Native American communities along the eastern seaboard used carefully crafted shell beads, known as wampum, as both currency and sacred ornament. Skilled artisans drilled and polished small cylindrical beads from quahog and whelk shells, stringing them into belts of deep purple and white. Wampum carried meaning far beyond simple trade value, often sealing treaties, honoring agreements, and recording important tribal history. European colonists, eager for a workable local currency, adopted wampum for a time, sometimes flooding markets with mass-produced imitations. It is a quiet, bittersweet story, a currency rich with meaning, slowly diluted once distant hands began mass-producing its worth. In Britain's early American colonies, chronic shortages of coin led some communities to declare an unlikely substitute, bundles of dried tobacco leaf, as official legal currency. Colonial law in parts of Virginia allowed debts, taxes, and even wages to be paid directly in carefully graded tobacco. Warehouses issued receipts for stored tobacco that could themselves circulate almost like paper currency among local merchants. Yet tobacco's value could swing wildly with each year's harvest, making it a famously unstable foundation for an economy. Even so, it quietly proves that trust can be built around almost anything a community agrees to honor together. Facing persistent coin shortages, several American colonies experimented with their own locally printed paper scrip, promising future redemption in silver or goods. These early paper notes often traded at a discount, since distant colonial governments could not always guarantee their promised value. Merchants grew skilled at judging which colony's scrip could be trusted and which should be accepted only cautiously. It was an uneven, uncertain system, yet it quietly rehearsed lessons that would matter enormously once a new nation needed its own currency. Trust, once again, had to be earned slowly, one uncertain colonial note at a time. Benjamin Franklin, long before his fame as a statesman, worked as a printer, deeply involved in designing early American colonial paper currency. He experimented with unique paper textures, nature print patterns of actual leaves, and careful ink formulas specifically to frustrate counterfeiters. His innovations quietly improved the reliability of paper money at a time when trust in printed currency remained fragile and uncertain. Even his clever techniques, however, could not entirely stop determined forgers from eventually finding their own workarounds.
It is a gentle reminder that even history's most inventive minds have always been drawn to this same old puzzle of trust.
Counterfeiting posed such a serious threat to colonial American currency that some colonies imposed shockingly severe punishments, including death, for forgers caught in the act.
Paper money's fragile trust made it an especially tempting and especially dangerous target for skilled forgers of the era. Some counterfeiters grew so skilled that their fake notes briefly outcirculated authentic currency in certain local markets. It is a quiet, uneasy thread running through every era we've wandered through tonight. Trust and deception, always moving together, hand in hand. The now familiar dollar sign did not originate with the United States at all, but likely evolved from an abbreviation used for the Spanish silver dollar. Early merchants and printers gradually simplified handwritten abbreviations for Spanish coinage into the simple symbol we still use today. By the time the young United States created its own currency, the symbol had already become familiar and trusted across colonial trade. It is a quiet, easily overlooked thread, a symbol born from Spanish silver, quietly inherited by an entirely different young nation. Persistent coin shortages across the American colonies, worsened by British restrictions on colonial minting, often pushed communities back toward older habits of barter. Farmers might pay a debt in grain, tools, or labor, quietly reviving practices far older than any coin or paper note. This blending of old and new, coin, scrip, and barter, existing side by side, captured something quietly true about how economies actually function. Trust, it seems, has never depended on a single perfect system, only on whatever patient arrangement people agree to honor together. With the arrival of steam-powered minting machinery in the early industrial era, coins could finally be struck with remarkable, uniform precision at astonishing speed. Machines pressed each coin with identical weight and design, virtually eliminating the small irregularities that once made forgery so much easier to attempt. What had once required painstaking manual labor by skilled craftsmen could now be produced by the thousands within a single day. Yet, even this remarkable precision could not fully erase the older, quieter forces of trust and doubt still shaping every currency. Technology had changed the coin's shape, but not the ancient promise still resting quietly inside it. During the 19th century, many of the world's major economies gradually adopted what became known as the gold standard, tying their currency's value directly to a fixed amount of gold. This system offered a comforting sense of stability, since paper currency could, in theory, always be exchanged for real, tangible gold. International trade grew smoother as nations trusted one another's currency, each backed by the same shining, universal metal. Yet maintaining enough gold reserves to support this promise would eventually prove far more difficult than anyone first imagined. Even gold, it turns out, could not entirely escape the fragile, human nature of trust. As national economies grew more complex through the industrial era, many countries established central banks, tasked with managing currency and safeguarding public trust in money itself. These institutions issued official banknotes, set interest rates, and worked quietly to prevent the kind of debasement that had plagued earlier centuries. For ordinary citizens, this meant a growing confidence that the currency in their pocket carried a stable, dependable worth. Yet even central banks, however carefully managed, could not fully shield their nations from the shocks of war, panic, or economic downturn. Trust, once again, needed constant patient tending, no matter how carefully an institution was built. As banknotes grew more trusted through the 19th century, ordinary citizens increasingly carried paper rather than heavy pockets full of coin for daily transactions. A single banknote could represent a sum that would otherwise require an uncomfortably heavy handful of gold or silver coins. Coins gradually shifted towards smaller, everyday transactions, while paper quietly took over the role of storing and moving larger sums. This shift did not happen instantly, and many communities remained cautious of paper for decades after its introduction. Slowly, quietly, trust learned to rest as comfortably on paper as it once had on metal. To combat the old, persistent crime of coin clipping, mints across Europe adopted finely milled edges, pressing small ridges around a coin's rim. Any attempt to shave silver from the edge would immediately disturb this pattern, making tampering instantly visible to a careful eye. This simple, elegant solution finally closed a loophole that had quietly plagued coinage for well over 1,000 years. It is remarkable how such an old and stubborn problem could be solved by something as small as a ridged edge. Sometimes, trust only needs one small, clever design to finally hold steady.
The invention of the telegraph allowed financial information to travel across continents in mere minutes, something entirely unimaginable throughout most of coinage's long history.
Bankers could suddenly confirm balances, transfers, and prices between distant cities almost instantly, rather than waiting weeks for a ship or courier. This new speed quietly reshaped how quickly trust itself could be confirmed between strangers separated by an ocean. Yet this same speed also meant that panic, when it struck one market, could now spread to distant markets almost as quickly. Trust, it seems, always travels exactly as fast as the fear that threatens to undo it. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, sudden waves of public fear occasionally triggered bank runs, as depositors rushed to withdraw their savings all at once. Even well-managed banks, unable to instantly produce every depositor's funds in coin, sometimes collapsed beneath the sheer weight of sudden, spreading doubt. These difficult moments revealed a quiet truth about all banking, that it rests not on vaults of gold alone, but on the fragile calm of collective confidence. We hold this thought gently, understanding it not as failure alone, but as a solemn reminder of trust's quiet fragility. Confidence, once shaken, always takes far longer to rebuild than it ever took to lose. The gold standard, once trusted as an unshakable foundation for currency, was gradually abandoned by many nations during the economic crises of the early 20th century. Governments found that rigidly tying currency to fixed gold reserves left them unable to respond flexibly to sudden financial hardship. One by one, nations quietly stepped away from the gold standard, trusting instead in careful government management of currency itself. It marked a profound, quiet shift from trusting a shining metal to trusting the patient judgment of human institutions instead. In the aftermath of a devastating global conflict, representatives from dozens of nations gathered to design a new, cooperative system for international currency stability. This new arrangement linked major currencies loosely to gold through the American dollar, hoping to prevent the currency chaos of previous decades. For a time, it offered the world a renewed, shared sense of financial trust across previously war-torn economies. Yet even this carefully designed system would eventually give way to newer, more flexible arrangements as decades passed. Trust between nations, like trust between individuals, always requires patient, ongoing renewal. By the mid-20th century, coins had settled quietly into a smaller, more modest role, reserved mostly for everyday small change rather than significant wealth. Paper currency and, later, simple banking records carried the greater weight of a nation's larger transactions and savings. A coin's jingle in a pocket became associated more with a bus fare or a cup of coffee than with any grand fortune. Yet coins never fully disappeared, holding on to a quiet, familiar place in daily human ritual. Even reduced to small change, the coin carried forward the same ancient promise it always had. Across the 20th century, this slow shift from metal to paper, and eventually towards simple recorded numbers, marked one of history's quietest revolutions. Wealth increasingly existed not as something held physically in hand, but as a trusted figure recorded carefully in a ledger or account. This required an even deeper act of trust than any coin ever had, trusting an institution's careful, honest record-keeping completely. It is a gentle, remarkable thought that money, across thousands of years, gradually became less physical and more purely an act of shared belief. Even in our modern era, nations continue minting commemorative coins, small metal discs designed to honor history, anniversaries, and quiet moments of national memory. These coins are rarely meant for everyday spending, instead becoming small treasured keepsakes passed between collectors and families alike. A commemorative coin can carry an entire story in its palm-sized design. A portrait, a landmark, a symbol of remembrance. Some are minted in such limited numbers that their value quickly grows far beyond their original face worth. Even now, a coin's oldest purpose, carrying meaning across time, remains quietly alive. Coin collecting, known formally as numismatics, has grown into a beloved hobby practiced quietly by enthusiasts across the entire world. Collectors study small details, mint marks, wear patterns, subtle design variations, the way historians once studied ancient manuscripts. For many, a coin collection becomes a quiet, tangible timeline of human history, held gently in careful albums and display cases. Some collectors search patiently for decades to complete a single series, treasuring the hunt as much as the coin itself. It is a gentle, modern echo of humanity's oldest fascination with these small, storied discs of metal. Across many cultures, coins have long carried quiet superstitions far beyond their economic value, woven gently into ritual and memory. Some ancient traditions placed coins upon the eyes of the deceased, a quiet fare thought to guide a soul across into the next world. Others tossed coins into wishing wells or fountains, offering a small, hopeful token in exchange for a whispered wish. Even today, travelers quietly toss coins into fountains in cities around the world, continuing a tradition far older than most remember. A coin, it seems, has always meant more to us than the metal pressed inside it. Every coin, in its own small way, functions almost like a tiny sculpture, preserving a fragment of the era that created it. A single coin can carry a ruler's face, a nation's symbol, or a quiet artistic style entirely unique to its century. Museums of numismatics around the world display these small objects carefully, treating them as seriously as paintings or sculpture. Yet, unlike most art, coins were made to be touched, carried, and spent, worn smooth by countless anonymous hands. It is a quiet, gentle thought that history's most handled objects may also be among its most honest storytellers.
Modern hobbyists using simple metal detectors have occasionally uncovered extraordinary coin hoards buried centuries ago beneath quiet, ordinary fields.
Some of these discoveries have included thousands of ancient coins, hidden away during long-forgotten moments of war or unrest. Archaeologists carefully study each find, piecing together clues about trade routes, economic conditions, and daily life from centuries past. Many of these hoards likely represent a family's entire life savings, buried in fear and never reclaimed. Even now, the quiet ground beneath our feet may still be holding on to forgotten fragments of ancient trust. Sunken shipwrecks scattered across ocean floors have occasionally revealed remarkable troves of coins, lost centuries ago during storms or naval conflict. Deep-sea explorers have recovered gleaming silver and gold coins still remarkably preserved, having rested quietly on the seabed for hundreds of years. Each recovered coin carries a small, silent story of a voyage that never reached its intended destination. Some of these shipwreck coins are so well preserved that experts can still read the mint marks pressed centuries ago. The ocean, it seems, has quietly guarded these small fortunes far longer than any vault ever could, Coins recovered from ancient ruins and shipwrecks alike continue to teach historians remarkable details about vanished empires and forgotten trade routes. A single coin's design, metal composition, and wear pattern can reveal where it traveled and how long it circulated before finally being lost. In this quiet way, coins function almost like small time capsules, carrying evidence forward long after empires themselves have crumbled to dust. Entire chapters of ancient economic history have been reconstructed patiently, coin by coin, hoard by hoard. It is a gentle reminder that even the smallest object can quietly outlive the grandest empire that made it. Even as digital payments and electronic transfers grow more common in daily life, the physical coin has quietly refused to disappear entirely. Many cultures still mint coins for daily use, for tradition, and for the simple tactile comfort of holding something real in hand. A coin remains, even now, a small physical symbol of an ancient agreement that this object, however humble, is worth something shared between strangers. Perhaps this is why coins endure so quietly in ceremony, superstition, and memory, long after their practical need has faded. Some ideas, it seems, are simply too old and too trusted to ever fully disappear. Across West Africa, traders once used heavy bronze and copper bracelets called manillas as a trusted, portable form of currency, long before coins arrived from distant shores. Blacksmiths cast these open, horseshoe-shaped rings in careful, standardized weights, allowing them to be counted and exchanged with confidence across many different communities. European traders arriving along the coast soon began bringing manillas by the shipload, exchanging them for goods, and, in a difficult chapter of this history, for enslaved people during the transatlantic trade. We acknowledge this honestly and briefly, a solemn truth beneath an otherwise ordinary story of metal and trust. It is a quiet reminder that currency's history is never only comfort and convenience. Sometimes it carries real sorrow quietly within its shape. Among the Akan peoples of West Africa, gold dust itself served as currency for centuries, measured with astonishing precision using small brass weights cast in the shapes of animals, tools, and proverbs. A merchant would place gold dust on one side of a tiny scale, balancing it against these carefully weighted brass figures until both sides settled evenly. Each weight's design often carried a small proverb or moral lesson, turning an ordinary transaction into a quiet exchange of wisdom as well as gold. Disputes over weight were common, and a trusted local weigher's judgment often settled disagreements no scale alone could resolve. It is a gentle thought that even measuring wealth once carried its own small poetry. In the highlands of the Horn of Africa, bars of hardened salt, carefully cut and smoothed, once circulated as one of the region's most trusted forms of currency. Caravans carried these salt bars, sometimes called amole, across mountain paths to distant markets where coin was scarce and salt was precious beyond its seasoning. A trader might pay for cloth, grain, or lodging entirely in these smooth, pale bars, each one recognized readily by its careful, consistent shape. Unlike metal coin, salt currency could not be hoarded forever, since moisture and time would slowly wear it down. It is a quiet, humble kind of money, valuable precisely because, like so much else, it did not last forever. In parts of Central Africa, large cross-shaped ingots of copper, sometimes called Katanga crosses, once served as a trusted store of wealth, passed carefully between traders and families. Each ingot was cast to a fairly standard weight, allowing it to function almost like a very large, very heavy coin. These copper crosses were sometimes used for major transactions, dowries, or ceremonial exchanges rather than everyday small purchases. Their considerable weight meant that, much like early cattle currency, they were far better suited to storing wealth than spending it quickly. Even shaped as a cross rather than a circle, this quiet object carried the same old promise every currency has always carried. Long before European ships ever reached its shores, the trading center we now call Great Zimbabwe thrived on a bustling exchange of gold, ivory, and cloth, with merchants from across the Indian Ocean. Its stone-walled markets exchanged goods rather than any single local coinage, relying instead on careful barter and trusted trading partnerships built over generations. Gold mined nearby traveled outward along Indian Ocean trade winds, eventually reaching markets as distant as India and the Arabian Peninsula. Much of this vast network left behind no coins at all, only foreign pottery shards and beads as quiet evidence of its reach. Trade, once again, proved older and wider than any single currency used to measure it.
An Austrian silver coin, known as the Maria Theresa thaler, first minted in the 18th century, became so deeply trusted across parts of Africa and the Middle East that it continued circulating there for well over a century after its original minting ceased.
Traders in these regions insisted on coins bearing the exact original date, refusing later reissues as somehow less authentic, even though the design and silver content remained identical. Mints in Europe continued striking this same coin, frozen forever at its original date, purely to satisfy this distant, deeply rooted trust. It is a strange and gentle irony. A coin trusted so completely that trust itself refused to let its design ever change. In the highlands of Ethiopia, Emperor Menelik II introduced one of Africa's earliest modern national currencies, striking silver coins bearing his own portrait for the first time. This new currency, alongside a modern mint, helped tie Ethiopia's economy more closely to global trade, even as the empire preserved its own long and distinct history. Older forms of currency, including salt bars and Maria Theresa thalers, continued circulating quietly alongside these new coins for years afterward. Communities often trusted whichever currency their neighbors trusted, regardless of which government had issued it. Even amid modernization, the oldest rule of money held steady. Trust, not decree alone, decides what truly counts as currency. Long before Lydia's famous coins reached the wider world, ancient India was independently developing its own early coinage. Small silver pieces stamped not with images but with simple punched symbols. These punch-marked coins, some of the earliest known from South Asia, carried marks like the sun, trees, or geometric shapes rather than a ruler's face. Merchants across the Indian subcontinent gradually came to trust these small silver pieces for trade, stretching from river ports to inland markets. Historians still debate exactly how independently this coinage tradition developed alongside similar innovations far to the west. It is a quiet reminder that humanity, in more than one place at once, kept discovering the same patient solution to the same old problem of trust.
Archaeologists working in southern India have uncovered surprising numbers of ancient Roman gold coins, carried there by maritime traders exchanging spices, pepper, and fine cloth.
Roman merchants sailed with seasonal monsoon winds across the Indian Ocean, trading directly with South Indian ports for goods prized deeply back in Rome. Local rulers sometimes defaced these Roman coins with small punch marks, transforming foreign currency into locally recognized, trusted tender. This quiet trade imbalance worried some Roman writers, who complained of gold flowing steadily eastward with little returning home. Even 2,000 years ago, trade's gentle current was already pulling wealth across oceans few had ever imagined crossing. Under the Grand Mughal Empire, mints across India struck magnificent gold coins called mohurs, prized for their size, purity, and often exquisite calligraphic design. These large gold pieces circulated among nobility and wealthy merchants, while smaller silver rupees handled the ordinary business of daily trade. Mughal emperors took great pride in their coinage, viewing a beautifully struck mohur as a quiet reflection of imperial glory itself. Yet even this magnificent coinage could not shield the empire from the slow political fractures that would eventually divide it. Even the grandest gold, in the end, answered to the same fragile trust as the humblest coin before it. Across much of India for many centuries, small cowrie shells continued serving everyday trade long after other regions had shifted fully toward coin. Local rulers sometimes accepted taxes paid partly in cowries, recognizing their steady, practical value for the smallest household transactions. A single copper or silver coin might be worth hundreds of these tiny shells, making cowries ideal for purchases too small to justify metal currency. Only gradually, as British colonial administration expanded, did cowrie currency fade fully from everyday use. It is a gentle reminder that older currencies rarely vanish all at once. They simply grow quieter, tucked into smaller and smaller corners of daily life. As British colonial trading companies expanded their influence across India, they gradually standardized the rupee, replacing a patchwork of regional coinages with one dependable silver standard. This unified rupee made trade considerably smoother across a vast and previously fragmented subcontinent, easing the constant burden of currency conversion. Yet this same standardization also tied Indian currency ever more closely to distant colonial economic interests. In the early 20th century, the rupee's link to silver was eventually loosened, following pressures echoing far beyond India's own borders. Even something as steady as a coin, it turns out, always answers quietly to forces well beyond its own borders. In ancient Mesoamerica, the Aztec people treasured cacao beans so highly that they used them as a genuine, widely trusted form of currency, alongside their more ceremonial role in sacred drinks. A small handful of cacao beans might buy a simple meal, while larger purchases required counting out beans by the hundreds. Market officials walked among the stalls checking weights and prices, ensuring this edible currency was traded fairly and honestly. Because cacao beans were also delicious and valuable as food, the temptation to spend one's own currency, quietly, secretly, was probably harder to resist than with any coin. It is a warm, curious thought. A currency you could, if truly desperate, simply eat. Aztec marketplaces guarded carefully against a peculiar kind of counterfeiting. Dishonest traders sometimes hollowed out cacao beans and refilled them with dirt or clay before mixing them back into a large pile. Market officials, aware of this trick, learned to gently press and inspect beans before accepting large payments. Such counterfeit beans, discovered too late, could quietly cheat an unsuspecting buyer out of real value for nothing at all. It is a small, human echo of every counterfeiting story we have wandered through tonight. Wherever trust holds real value, someone quietly learns to hollow it out. Even a bean, it seems, was not safe from this oldest of economic temptations. Beyond cacao, The ancient Maya also placed enormous value on brilliant green quetzal feathers and polished jade, both reserved almost entirely for nobility and sacred exchange. These prestige goods rarely changed hands in ordinary daily trade, instead marking tribute, royal gifts, and carefully guarded displays of status. A noble family's wealth might be measured as much in jade ornaments as in any more practical currency. Such prestige currencies carried meaning far beyond simple economic worth, blending value with sacred and social significance. It is a quiet reminder that not all currency has ever been about buying bread. Sometimes it has simply been about being seen and remembered.
When Spanish conquest swept across Mesoamerica, these older currencies of cacao, jade, and feather quietly gave way to Spanish silver coinage within only a few difficult generations.
Indigenous marketplaces, once organized around cacao counting and careful bean inspection, were gradually reshaped around foreign coins and colonial economic rules. For a time, cacao beans and Spanish coins circulated together, each trusted differently depending on the marketplace and the trader. It is a solemn, quiet transition, one small thread among many in a much larger and more difficult history of conquest. We hold this thought honestly, without lingering in detail, acknowledging the full weight behind this change. The Ottoman Empire's early silver coin, known as the akçe, served as the primary currency across a vast realm stretching from the Balkans to the edges of Persia. For generations, it remained a trusted, dependable coin, accepted confidently in markets stretching across 3 continents. Yet over centuries of costly wars and shifting fortunes, Ottoman mints gradually reduced its silver content, echoing the same quiet debasement that had troubled Rome centuries earlier. Merchants, noticing the coin's declining worth, grew increasingly cautious, favoring more stable foreign currencies for larger transactions. Even a mighty empire's coin, it seems, could not entirely escape this ancient and familiar pattern. Ottoman coins often bore an elegant calligraphic emblem known as a tugra, a stylized signature representing the Sultan's authority in flowing, decorative script. This intricate design served much the same purpose as a Roman emperor's portrait, announcing quiet royal legitimacy to anyone who handled the coin. Skilled engravers took great pride in rendering this signature with precision, since a poorly struck tugra could subtly undermine a coin's perceived authority. Counterfeiters occasionally attempted to imitate this elaborate design, though its complexity made convincing forgery genuinely difficult to achieve. Even in its beauty, this signature carried the same old promise every coin has always carried. Trust me, on the authority of the one who made me. The Russian word for its smallest coin, the kopek, is thought to come from a small image of a mounted horseman bearing a spear, struck onto the coin's early design. Tsar Peter the Great later undertook sweeping currency reforms, modernizing Russian minting to more closely resemble the standardized coinage already established across Western Europe. His reforms introduced more consistent weights and denominations, easing trade between Russia and its European trading partners. Yet, reforming an entire currency system required years of careful, patient adjustment across a vast and often remote empire. Even far to the north, the same quiet lessons of trust and standardization were slowly, patiently being learned. Empress Catherine the Great later introduced Russia's first widely circulated paper banknotes, hoping to ease the burden of transporting Russia's famously heavy copper coinage across such an enormous territory. These early notes were meant to be freely exchanged for copper coin, offering a lighter, more convenient alternative for merchants and travelers alike. Public trust in this new paper currency grew only gradually, much as it had in every other corner of the world we've wandered through tonight. Excessive printing in later, more troubled years would eventually strain that trust, echoing lessons learned many centuries earlier in distant Song Dynasty China. Some lessons, it seems, must be quietly relearned in every new place they arrive. Across the vast, cold expanse of Siberia, furs, sable, fox, and ermine long served as a trusted parallel currency, especially in regions where coin remained scarce and difficult to transport. Trappers and traders measured value in pelts as naturally as merchants elsewhere measured it in silver, each fur carrying its own understood worth. Russian tax collectors even accepted furs directly as tribute from distant communities, treating them as seriously as coined money. Yet furs, unlike metal, could rot, tear, or lose their value entirely if poorly kept through a long winter. It is a gentle reminder that trust has always been willing to rest on the most unexpected, most fragile of objects.
During the American Revolutionary War, the fledgling Continental Congress issued paper currency to fund its struggle, printing far more than its uncertain treasury could ever hope to redeem.
As the war dragged on, public confidence in this currency crumbled, and its value sank so low that merchants openly refused to accept it at face value. A common phrase soon emerged, dismissing anything utterly worthless as not worth a continental, a quiet echo still faintly remembered today. It is a solemn, familiar lesson, repeated now for perhaps the 5th time tonight, that a currency's value rests entirely on a trust that can be spent far more easily than it can be rebuilt. Even after declaring independence, American merchants continued trusting the old Spanish silver dollar for years, since it remained more reliable than the young nation's own uncertain currency. This foreign coin circulated so widely and so comfortably that its name and rough value quietly shaped the very design of the new nation's future currency. For a time, Spanish, British, and early American coins all mingled together in the same merchant's till, each judged individually on its own careful merit. Sorting through this patchwork of currencies required patience, sharp eyes, and no small amount of quiet trust between strangers. It is a gentle reminder that new nations, like new coins, must earn their trust slowly, one careful transaction at a time. To finally settle this patchwork confusion, the young United States established its first official mint in Philadelphia, tasked with striking a single, standardized national currency. Early coin designs featured a flowing image of liberty, a quiet symbol chosen deliberately to represent the new nation's founding ideals rather than any single ruler's face. This choice itself was a small but meaningful departure from centuries of coinage dominated by kings, emperors, and sultans. Striking enough coin to serve an entire growing nation, however, would take the young mint many patient years to fully achieve. It is a quiet, hopeful thought, a currency built, for the first time, to represent an idea rather than a person. Throughout the early 19th century, hundreds of individual American banks issued their own paper currency, each note backed only by that particular bank's own promised reserves. Merchants needed thick reference books simply to judge which distant bank's notes could be trusted and which were nearly worthless. Some notes, issued by banks located in remote, hard-to-verify locations, earned the wry nickname of wildcat currency, since only a wildcat, it was joked, could reach the bank to redeem them. It is a colorful, slightly chaotic chapter, reminding us how fragile trust becomes once scattered across too many separate promises. Order, when it finally came, would have to arrive slowly and only through careful national standardization. Eventually, new federal banking laws established a single, standardized national currency, gradually taxing and phasing out the confusing patchwork of individual state banknotes. This reform brought a long-awaited consistency to American currency, easing trade and travel across an increasingly connected, expanding nation. A dollar earned in one distant state could finally be trusted just as confidently in another, without complicated conversion or careful suspicion. Yet building this trust required decades of patient reform, following many earlier decades of confusion and quiet loss. Even a young nation, it seems, must walk the same slow road toward trust that every civilization before it had already walked.
Throughout the 19th century, sudden waves of financial panic occasionally swept across growing economies as nervous depositors rushed all at once to withdraw their savings.
Even carefully managed banks sometimes buckled beneath the sheer weight of this sudden, spreading fear, unable to produce funds fast enough to calm the crowd. Each panic left behind hard lessons about the fragile nature of confidence. Lessons that were slowly, painfully absorbed into new banking safeguards. We hold this thought gently, understanding these moments not merely as failure, but as quiet reminders of how carefully trust must always be tended. Confidence, once shaken, always needed patient years to fully settle again. In the early 20th century, several nations established central reserve institutions specifically designed to calm these recurring panics, acting as a steady, trusted backstop behind the wider banking system. These institutions could lend emergency funds during moments of sudden fear, helping prevent a single nervous rumor from toppling an otherwise healthy bank. For ordinary citizens, this meant a growing, quiet confidence that their modest savings rested on something sturdier than any single institution alone. Yet, even these careful new safeguards would soon be tested by economic troubles far larger than anyone had anticipated. Trust, once again, needed constant, patient reinforcement, no matter how carefully a system was designed.
During the depths of a severe global economic downturn in the early 20th century, one government temporarily closed every bank in the country, hoping a brief pause might calm widespread public panic.
Citizens were also asked, during this same difficult period, to exchange their privately held gold coin for paper currency, ending an era of everyday gold circulation for good. It was a solemn, disorienting time for many families, watching a familiar form of money quietly withdrawn from daily life. Yet this pause, difficult as it was, slowly allowed confidence to steady itself once again across a shaken economy. We hold this chapter gently, recognizing both its hardship and its quiet, eventual calm. During periods of occupation and global conflict in the 20th century, some governments issued special military or occupation currencies within territories under their temporary control. These notes often held little lasting value once the conflict ended, since they were backed by authority that itself proved temporary. Families sometimes found themselves holding drawers full of currency that, almost overnight, became worthless paper once circumstances changed. It is a solemn, difficult reminder that a currency's value has never truly rested in the paper itself, but always in the trust and authority standing quietly behind it. We acknowledge this history honestly, without lingering, as one more quiet lesson carried forward from a difficult era. In the aftermath of these difficult conflicts, several shattered economies introduced entirely fresh currencies, deliberately breaking from the troubled, worn-out money of the previous difficult years. A new currency offered communities a quiet, symbolic fresh start, a chance to rebuild trust from careful, steady beginnings, rather than a discredited past. Central banks in these years worked patiently to earn back a confidence that war and crisis had badly worn away. It rarely happened quickly, and many of these young currencies faced years of careful, cautious rebuilding before earning full public trust. Even after history's hardest chapters, it seems, trust could always be patiently rebuilt, coin by coin, note by note. Long before electronic banking, merchants and account holders in growing economies increasingly relied on written checks, allowing large sums to move safely between accounts without any coin changing hands at all. A check was, in its own quiet way, simply another descendant of the old medieval bill of exchange, trust once again expressed through paper and signature. Clearing houses developed careful systems to settle thousands of these checks between different banks each single day. Fraud, of course, occasionally crept into this system too, forged signatures echoing the same old counterfeiting concerns from centuries before. Trust, it seems, simply kept finding new shapes to travel in.
In the middle of the 20th century, a simple misplaced wallet at a restaurant reportedly inspired the idea for one of history's first modern credit cards, a small plastic promise of future payment. These new cards allowed a diner or shopper to buy now and settle the balance later, backed not by coin in hand, but by a bank's quiet confidence in the cardholder. For the first time, ordinary trust between neighbors had been formalized into a plastic card small enough to fit inside a pocket. Merchants needed time to grow comfortable trusting this new, unfamiliar promise instead of cash placed directly in hand. Once again, an old idea, trust extended forward in time, simply found a smaller, more modern shape to travel in. Automated teller machines later appeared quietly on street corners and bank walls, allowing ordinary people to withdraw cash at any hour without ever speaking to a single bank clerk. This small, humming machine represented a quiet revolution in convenience, offering coin and paper currency around the clock, rather than only during a bank's careful business hours. Early customers approached these machines cautiously, uncertain whether a simple card and code could truly be trusted the way a familiar teller once was. Slowly, patiently, trust extended itself once more, this time toward a quiet machine rather than a familiar human face. Even trust, it seems, can eventually learn to rest comfortably on something entirely unfamiliar. Behind the scenes, vast electronic networks quietly began settling transactions between banks in mere moments, a far cry from the ships and couriers that once carried coin and letters for weeks at a time. These systems allowed money to move invisibly and instantly across entire countries, confirmed by nothing more than trusted digital records passing quietly between institutions. For most ordinary people, this invisible movement remained entirely unseen, felt only in the quiet convenience of a settled bill or a cleared payment. Yet this same invisible speed meant that confidence, once shaken, could now spread just as quickly through an entire connected system. Trust, it seems, has always traveled exactly as fast as the technology carrying it. In more recent decades, small chips embedded quietly within cards and even everyday devices allowed a simple tap to complete a purchase within a single, unhurried second. This contactless convenience echoed, in its own modern way,
the very same old desire that first inspired coinage. A fast, simple, trusted way to settle a trade without lingering negotiation. Many people found themselves reaching for a card or a device far more often than for coin or paper, especially for life's smallest daily purchases. Yet, even amid this quiet convenience, plenty of people still reached instinctively for a familiar coin from time to time. Old habits of trust, it seems, rarely disappear completely. They simply grow quieter, waiting patiently in the background. Despite centuries of change, coins still slip quietly into daily ritual in ways that have little to do with buying anything at all. A child still drops a coin hopefully into a piggy bank, learning patience long before understanding interest or inflation. A parent still tucks a coin beneath a pillow for a lost tooth, continuing a small, gentle tradition older than most families remember its origin. None of these small rituals require a coin's practical spending power at all, only its familiar, comforting shape. Perhaps this is why the coin endures so quietly, not because we still need it, but because some part of us still trusts it.
Sweden once minted currency so impractically large that a single coin, a heavy square sheet of copper, could weigh close to 20 pounds and require 2 hands simply to lift.
These enormous copper plates were valued according to the raw price of the metal itself, at a time when Sweden's copper mines produced far more than its silver reserves could match. Carrying a modest fortune in this currency might have genuinely required a small cart rather than a simple coin purse. Unsurprisingly, such an impractical currency quietly encouraged Sweden's early and eager adoption of lighter paper banknotes soon afterward. Sometimes, it seems, the clumsiest coin in history can quietly nudge an entire nation towards something better. At the opposite extreme, some ancient and medieval mints struck coins so impossibly small and thin that a handful could scarcely be felt resting in an open palm. These tiny fractional coins, sometimes barely wider than a fingernail, allowed merchants to make change for even the smallest, most modest purchases. Striking such delicate pieces required remarkable skill, since even a slightly careless hammer blow could destroy the fragile little disc entirely. Many of these tiny coins have simply been lost to time, too small and fragile to survive centuries buried in soil. Even the smallest coin, it turns out, once carried the very same careful promise as the largest. Coins recovered from long-lost shipwrecks are sometimes carefully remelted and struck anew, transforming centuries-old silver into fresh commemorative pieces honoring the very wreck they came from. A collector today might hold a coin containing the very same silver that once rested quietly on an ocean floor for hundreds of patient years. Such coins carry a strange, layered history. Ancient metal, lost voyage, ocean floor, and modern rebirth, all folded quietly into a single, small disc. Purists sometimes debate whether such restruck coins deserve the same reverence as an untouched original recovered from the sea. Even metal, it seems, can be given a second quiet chapter in its long, patient story.
Occasionally, a small mistake slips past a mint's careful inspectors, producing what collectors excitedly call an error coin, prized precisely because it was never meant to exist at all.
A misaligned stamp, a doubled image, or an accidentally blank surface can transform an otherwise ordinary coin into something remarkably rare and sought after. Some of these accidental coins have sold for many times their face value, treasured not despite their flaw, but because of it. It is a curious, gentle irony that the mint's rare failures have become some of its most quietly celebrated creations. Even imperfection, it seems, can become its own small, unexpected form of value. Archaeologists often rely on coins as remarkably precise dating tools, since a coin found buried in a layer of soil cannot possibly be older than the year it was struck. This simple, elegant logic allows historians to date entire layers of an ancient site just by identifying a single reliable coin buried within it. A coin's mint mark, ruler's portrait, or inscription can pin an entire excavation to within a few careful years of certainty. Without this small, humble object, much of ancient history would remain far more uncertain than it is today. It is a quiet, remarkable thought that the humble coin, once meant only for buying bread, now quietly helps us measure time itself. Across many centuries and cultures, sweethearts and soldiers alike have taken ordinary coins and carefully engraved them into small, sentimental keepsakes known as love tokens. A soldier heading off to war might smooth down a coin's face and etch a loved one's initials, a small heart, or a gentle parting message. These engraved coins were treasured not for their spending value at all, but for the quiet devotion pressed carefully into their surface. Many love tokens still survive today, tucked away in museum drawers, carrying a tenderness that no ordinary currency was ever designed to hold. Even money, it seems, has occasionally been quietly repurposed into something purely, gently human. In several ancient cultures, coins were placed carefully among grave goods, buried alongside the dead as a quiet gesture of provision for whatever journey lay ahead. Archaeologists excavating ancient burial sites have occasionally found coins tucked into a closed hand, resting near the mouth, or scattered gently around the body. This custom echoes a tender, universal human hope that even in death, one should not arrive somewhere new, completely empty-handed. Such coins, of course, were never meant to be spent, only carried quietly as a small comfort into the unknown. It is a gentle, haunting thought that even our oldest currency has always carried more than economic value alone. In 19th century Europe, several nations attempted an ambitious agreement known as the Latin Monetary Union, aligning their coinage to a shared silver and gold standard so currency could cross borders with ease. For a time, a coin minted in one member nation could be spent almost seamlessly in another, a rare and remarkable moment of shared monetary trust. Yet each nation still controlled its own mint, and subtle differences in enforcement slowly strained the union's careful balance. Economic pressures and diverging national interests eventually wore the agreement down, until it quietly dissolved within a few generations. Even shared trust between neighboring nations, it turns out, requires patient, continuous tending to survive. Decades before political unification, a group of German states had already formed a quiet customs union, easing trade and gradually aligning currency and tariffs across many small, previously separate territories. This careful economic cooperation slowly built the shared trust and infrastructure that would later support a single unified currency once full political union finally arrived. Merchants who once faced a dozen different tolls and currencies crossing between small neighboring states found trade growing steadily smoother with each passing year. It is a quiet reminder that political unity often follows economic trust rather than the other way around. Sometimes, a shared coin can knit a people together long before a shared flag ever does. In more recent history, several European nations undertook the ambitious, patient project of adopting a single shared currency across many different countries at once. This required an enormous, coordinated effort to earn public trust across languages, cultures, and long, separate monetary histories. Older, beloved national currencies, some centuries old, were quietly retired in favor of this new, shared design. Building confidence in such a vast shared system took years of careful institution building, echoing lessons drawn from centuries of currency history before it. Even now, this remains a living, ongoing story, one more chapter in humanity's very long, patient relationship with trust and money. Across colonial East Africa, several neighboring territories once shared a single common currency, easing trade across borders that otherwise divided distinct peoples and languages. A single shilling could move between bustling coastal ports and quiet inland markets alike, carried by traders who trusted its consistent value throughout the region. This shared currency simplified commerce considerably, though it also tied these economies closely to decisions made in a distant colonial capital. As these territories gradually gained independence, many chose to introduce their own separate national currencies, valuing sovereignty over shared convenience. Even convenience, it seems, must sometimes yield quietly to a deeper, more personal kind of trust, the trust a people places in governing themselves. The Byzantine Empire's gold solidus, first introduced under Emperor Constantine, remained remarkably stable in weight and purity for well over 700 years, an almost unheard of achievement in coinage's long history. Merchants across Europe, the Islamic world, and beyond came to trust this single gold coin so deeply that it functioned almost like a shared international currency for centuries. Its consistency stood in quiet contrast to so many other coinages we have wandered through tonight, each eventually worn thin by debasement and doubt. Even so, as the empire itself weakened in its later centuries, its once untouchable coin slowly began to lose a little of its ancient shine. For a remarkably long while, though, it proved that patient discipline could hold a coin's trust steady far longer than most rulers ever managed. Byzantine mints guarded the solidus so carefully that even small deviations in weight or purity were treated as serious offenses against the empire's honor. This careful discipline meant a solidus struck in one century could be trusted almost as confidently as one struck generations earlier, a rare and quiet consistency. Traders from distant Islamic caliphates and northern European kingdoms alike willingly accepted this coin, valuing its dependable weight above their own local currency. Such trust, hard-won over centuries, made the solidus a quiet thread connecting economies that otherwise shared little in common. It is a gentle reminder that patience, more than any single ruler's ambition, is what truly builds a currency's lasting trust. Centuries later, the maritime Republic of Venice began striking its own gold ducat, a coin so carefully and consistently minted that it quickly rivaled Byzantium's solidus in trusted reputation. Venetian merchants, sailing across the Mediterranean, carried this dependable gold coin into ports throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Eastern trading world. Venice guarded its minting standards fiercely, understanding that even a single debased batch could quietly damage centuries of hard-earned trust. Rival trading cities sometimes attempted their own imitation coins, hoping to borrow a little of the ducat's widespread reputation. For generations, this small gold disc quietly carried Venice's careful reputation across an entire trading world. During the era of the medieval Crusades, a religious military order known as the Knights Templar developed an early network allowing pilgrims to deposit funds safely in one distant city and withdraw an equivalent sum in another far away. A traveler no longer needed to carry dangerous amounts of gold across bandit-prone roads, trusting instead in a carefully written letter of credit. This network, built on discipline and religious reputation, functioned remarkably like an early international banking system centuries before formal banks existed. When the order was eventually dissolved through political pressure, much of this carefully built financial trust quietly dispersed as well. Even trust built by knights and pilgrims, it seems, could not entirely escape the same fragile fate as every other currency we have wandered through tonight. In medieval England, the Royal Exchequer kept meticulous financial records using notched wooden sticks, split carefully down the middle so each party held half of the exact same record. These tally sticks recorded debts owed to the crown, and remarkably, the sticks themselves sometimes circulated as a kind of currency, trusted much like a modern note or bond. A merchant holding a tally stick representing a royal debt might trade it onward to someone else entirely, confident the crown would eventually honor it. This wooden record system endured for centuries, quietly predating much of the paper currency that would later replace it. It is a gentle, curious thought that trust once lived quite comfortably inside a simple, notched piece of wood.
Centuries after tally sticks fell out of official use, a vast stockpile of these old wooden records was ordered destroyed by burning them in a furnace beneath the halls of the English Parliament.
The fire, stoked far too generously with old wood, spiraled out of control and ultimately destroyed much of the historic Parliament building itself. It is a strange, almost gentle irony that an ancient, humble form of currency record ended its long life by quietly reshaping the very halls where England's laws and money were once so carefully debated. Even the oldest, quietest financial tools, it seems, can still surprise us on their way out of history. Early Japanese coinage closely followed the Chinese model, round bronze coins with a small square hole punched through the center for easy stringing and counting. For a time, Japan even imported Chinese coins directly, trusting a foreign currency until its own minting traditions grew fully established. Gradually, distinct Japanese designs and denominations emerged, reflecting the country's own governing structures and local trading needs. Political instability across various eras occasionally disrupted steady minting, leading merchants to rely once again on older, trusted foreign coin. Even coinage, it seems, sometimes needs to borrow trust from a neighbor before it can confidently stand on its own. Under the later Tokugawa shogunate, Japan developed a remarkably organized trimetallic currency system, using gold, silver, and copper coins, each suited to different scales of everyday transaction. Gold coins handled large payments among merchants and nobility, while copper coins settled the humble, everyday purchases of ordinary town life. Exchange rates between these three metals could shift with market conditions, requiring skilled money changers to help merchants navigate the careful balance. This layered system reflected a thoughtful, deliberate approach to matching currency scale with everyday human need. It is a gentle reminder that a well-designed currency often mirrors the quiet shape of the society using it. Remarkably, many samurai during this same era received their formal stipend not in coin at all, but in carefully measured allotments of rice, the traditional foundation of the entire economy. A samurai's rank and income were calculated in a unit of rice sufficient to feed one person for a full year. A quiet, practical measure of wealth. Merchants often converted this rice into coin on the samurai's behalf, bridging an old agricultural tradition with a newer coined economy. This blending of grain and coin echoes, in its own way, the very oldest currencies we wandered through at the very beginning of tonight's journey. Even in a sophisticated coined economy, it seems, the oldest currency of all, food itself, never entirely disappeared.
On the remote Pacific island of Yap, communities once used enormous carved limestone discs, some taller than a person, as a form of currency, unlike almost anything else in this history.
These massive stone discs were often left exactly where they were quarried or first placed, since moving something so heavy was rarely practical. Ownership simply transferred through shared community memory, everyone quietly agreeing on who now held rights to a particular stone. A stone lost at sea during transport could, remarkably, still retain its value, since the whole community remembered and agreed it once existed. It is a gentle, remarkable thought, perhaps history's purest example of currency as nothing more than a shared, trusted memory. On the islands of Fiji, carefully polished whale teeth, known as tabua, held deep ceremonial and economic value, exchanged during weddings, apologies, and important community agreements. A single tabua, its surface aged to a rich amber sheen, could carry more meaning in a single exchange than any ordinary coin ever could. These teeth were rarely, if ever, used for simple daily trade, reserved instead for moments of genuine social and ceremonial importance. Their value depended entirely on shared cultural understanding, utterly meaningless to anyone outside the tradition that gave them worth. It is a soft reminder that currency, at its heart, has always been a story a community agrees to tell itself together. Across the vast island continent of Australia, Aboriginal communities maintained extensive trade networks moving pearl shell, ochre, and finely crafted tools across thousands of miles of desert and coastline. Pearl shells from the northern coast, prized for their pale shimmer, traveled inland through careful trading partnerships passed down across generations. These networks required no coin at all, relying instead on kinship, ceremony, and deeply trusted relationships built over countless careful years. European settlers, arriving with their own coined currency, often failed entirely to recognize the sophisticated economic trust already woven quietly across the continent. It is a gentle reminder that trust, wherever it is found, rarely needs a coin to prove it is real. During a devastating period of economic collapse in early 20th century Germany, runaway printing of paper currency caused prices to double within mere hours rather than months or years. Citizens reportedly needed wheelbarrows simply to carry enough banknotes to purchase a single loaf of bread, the currency's value evaporating almost as quickly as it was printed. It stands as one of history's starkest reminders that a currency's worth rests entirely on trust, and that trust, once shattered completely, is almost impossible to quickly restore. Eventually, a carefully designed new currency, deliberately distinct from the failed one, slowly helped rebuild public confidence again. We hold this difficult chapter honestly, as one of the clearest lessons this long history has ever offered us.
During the Second World War, prisoners held in camps across Europe developed their own remarkably functional currency using ordinary cigarettes, since official money held little practical use behind camp walls.
Prisoners traded goods, services, and even gambled using cigarettes as a trusted unit of value, complete with its own quiet, informal exchange rate against other goods. Non-smokers sometimes still hoarded and traded cigarettes purely for their reliable currency value, never intending to smoke a single one themselves. This small, improvised economy demonstrated, in the most difficult of circumstances, how quickly human beings will invent a trusted currency wherever one is needed. Even behind the hardest walls, it seems, the old, patient instinct toward shared trust quietly found its way through. During the sudden gold rush that transformed California in the mid-19th century, official coin proved so scarce that several private mints began striking their own gold coins to meet urgent local demand. These privately minted coins, though unofficial, were often trusted readily by miners and merchants who valued their consistent gold content above any government seal. Some private mints built such strong reputations for honest weight that their coins circulated confidently alongside official currency for years. Eventually, expanding government minting operations gradually replaced these private coins as official supply finally caught up with rapid demand. Even amid the chaos of a sudden gold rush, the old, familiar rule held firm. Trust, however it is earned, is what makes a coin worth carrying. A similar gold rush unfolding around the same era in Australia likewise strained the colony's currency supply, prompting a local mint to begin striking gold sovereigns to ease chronic coin shortages. These colonial coins carried a distinct local design, quietly asserting the colony's own growing identity, even while remaining tied to a distant crown. Miners flooding into gold fields needed reliable coin for food, tools, and lodging, making a dependable local currency an urgent practical necessity. Balancing this local minting with loyalty to a distant monarchy required careful, diplomatic negotiation over many patient years. Even far from old Europe, the same ancient rhythm of scarcity, trust, and careful minting quietly repeated itself once more. In the early years of the American Republic, government representatives sometimes presented Native American leaders with specially struck silver peace medals, intended as tokens of diplomatic goodwill and friendship. These medals, often bearing a portrait alongside symbols of clasped hands or peaceful exchange, carried meaning far removed from any ordinary coin's practical spending value. Recipients sometimes wore these medals with great pride, treasuring them as marks of recognized status and diplomatic significance. Such gestures, however well-intentioned, existed within a much larger and more difficult history between these communities and expanding settlement. We note this small chapter honestly. Understanding a single medal never carried the full weight of a far larger, more complicated history. To ease trade with merchants across Asia who preferred silver of a very specific and trusted weight, several Western nations minted special trade dollars intended purely for foreign commerce rather than domestic use. These coins were carefully designed to match the weight and purity already trusted by merchants accustomed to older, familiar Spanish and Mexican silver dollars. Asian merchants sometimes stamped these trade coins with small local chop marks, a personal verification of trust layered directly onto the foreign design. A single trade dollar might carry a dozen tiny stamped marks by the time it finished its long journey through many careful hands. It is a quiet, fitting image to hold in mind. A coin so well traveled that its very surface became a small, layered record of every trust it earned along the way. The great scientist Isaac Newton, later in his career, took on a quiet, unexpected role as warden and eventually master of England's Royal Mint, overseeing the nation's coinage with the same careful precision he once brought to physics. He personally investigated counterfeiters, sometimes working undercover in taverns to gather evidence against those threatening the currency's trust. Under his careful watch, English coinage grew notably more precise and consistent, benefiting from a mind already trained to notice the smallest discrepancy. It is a curious, gentle thought that one of history's greatest scientific minds spent years of quiet, patient work simply defending the humble trust of a coin. Even genius, it turns out, understood how much ordinary life depended on that trust holding steady. Around this same era, a new institution was founded specifically to lend the government money in exchange for interest, gradually becoming one of the most trusted financial institutions in the country. This early central bank helped the nation finance wars and public projects by issuing bonds, a promise of future repayment, trusted by investors across the growing economy. Its notes and financial instruments slowly became so widely trusted that they functioned almost as reliably as coin itself in everyday large transactions. Building this trust took patient decades, much like every other currency innovation we have wandered through tonight. It is a gentle reminder that even a nation's grandest financial institutions begin with the same small, careful question every coin has always asked: can I be trusted?
The now familiar phrase declaring trust in a higher power was first added to American coinage during a period of great national hardship, when citizens sought comfort and unity through difficult, uncertain years.
A concerned citizen wrote to the Treasury suggesting the phrase, hoping it might offer quiet reassurance to a divided and weary nation. The motto first appeared on a small copper coin, before gradually spreading to other denominations over the following decades. Debate over the phrase's place on currency has continued quietly ever since, a small but persistent thread in the coin's long story. It is a gentle reminder that a coin, however small, has always carried more than economic meaning within its quiet design. In the modern era, dedicated grading services now carefully examine old and rare coins, assigning each one a precise numerical score reflecting its condition and preservation. A coin graded and sealed in a protective holder can command remarkably higher value, its authenticity and condition now vouched for by trusted, independent experts. Collectors around the world rely on this grading system the way ancient merchants once relied on a trusted mint's stamped mark. In many ways, this modern practice simply carries forward the same old question that has followed coinage since Lydia's very first lion-stamped lump of electrum. Some ancient habits, it seems, quietly persist no matter how many centuries pass between them. The Swiss franc earned a long and quiet reputation for remarkable stability, a currency many international investors trusted precisely because of its notably careful, conservative management over many decades. Even during periods of turmoil elsewhere across Europe, Switzerland's careful monetary discipline offered a steady, trusted harbor for cautious savers and merchants alike. This reputation was not built quickly, but earned patiently across generations of careful, restrained decision-making. It stands as a gentle, modern echo of the very same lesson Byzantium's Solidus once taught the ancient world so many centuries earlier. Trust, once again, proves itself the slowest currency to build and the easiest to lose. In the difficult years following the Second World War, one Central European nation experienced one of history's most extreme currency collapses, with prices reportedly doubling every single day for a period. The government eventually replaced the entirely worthless old currency with a brand new one, offering a difficult but necessary fresh start for a shattered economy. It stands alongside the wheelbarrow currency we spoke of earlier tonight as one of history's starkest reminders of how quickly trust in money can unravel under extreme pressure. Recovery, once again, required years of patient, careful rebuilding before ordinary confidence could quietly return. We hold this difficult chapter gently, one more solemn lesson carried forward from a hard and uncertain era. In isolated mining and logging towns of the 19th and early 20th centuries, some employers issued their own private tokens, redeemable only at the company's own store rather than for official currency. Workers paid partly in this scrip found themselves quietly tied to purchasing goods at prices the company itself controlled. This practice, while practical for remote communities without a nearby bank, often left workers with far less genuine economic freedom than ordinary coin might have offered. It is a quiet, uneasy reminder that not every currency in history has been designed purely to serve the person carrying it. We note this honestly, one more small thread in currency's very long and occasionally difficult tapestry. Certain coin designs have proven so enduring that mints have continued striking them, largely unchanged, for well over a century, a remarkable thread of visual continuity across vastly different eras. A collector today might hold a coin nearly identical in design to one carried by a great-great-grandparent, separated by decades of war, invention, and social change. Such enduring designs offer a quiet, tangible sense of continuity, a small reassurance that some things remain steady even as everything else transforms. Of course, the metal, the value, and the economy surrounding that coin have shifted considerably, even while its familiar face remained the same. It is a gentle thought to rest on, that a single small image can quietly outlive so many of the changes happening around it. Modern currency now employs remarkably careful anti-counterfeiting technology, from color-shifting inks to fine embedded threads and delicate watermarks visible only when held toward light. These careful innovations echo, in a quiet modern form, the very same impulse that once inspired ancient punch marks and milled coin edges centuries ago. A banknote today might carry a dozen hidden security features, each a small, patient answer to the ever-present temptation of forgery. Despite all this careful technology, determined counterfeiters continue trying, just as they always quietly have throughout this entire long history. Trust and deception, it seems, remain locked in the very same patient, ancient dance we began with, all the way back at the very start of tonight's journey. And so, as we near the end of this long, winding road together, it is worth pausing gently on just how much remains the same beneath every new invention we've wandered through tonight. A shell, a coin, a banknote, a tap of a card, each one, in its own quiet way, has simply been humanity's latest attempt to answer that same very old question. Can I trust you, a stranger I may never meet again, enough to hand you something small in exchange for something real? Across 10,000 years and every continent this earth holds, the answer, again and again, has quietly been yes. Let that gentle, steady yes settle over you now, like a warm blanket pulled slowly up over tired shoulders. Even the very shape of the coin, a simple round disc, was never truly an accident, but a quiet, practical choice repeated across nearly every culture we have wandered through tonight. A circle rolls evenly from a die during striking, stacks neatly in a merchant's hand, and wears down gradually rather than snagging or tearing along a sharp edge. Some ancient societies did experiment briefly with square or irregular shapes, yet the circle kept quietly winning out, century after century, culture after culture. It is a small, easily overlooked detail, yet it reveals just how much careful, practical thought settled quietly into even a coin's most basic form. Sometimes the humblest shape, chosen so long ago, simply proves itself patient enough to outlast every fashion that follows it. Across every era we've wandered through tonight, one quiet pattern kept gently repeating itself, in shell and salt, in silver and paper alike. Whenever a currency grew scarce or difficult to trust, people simply found some new object nearby to lean their agreements against instead. A missing coin never stopped trade entirely, only nudged communities toward whatever else they could mutually agree to honor. This flexibility, more than any single metal or design, may be the truest secret behind money's remarkable endurance across so many different ages. Trust, it turns out, was never really about the object at all, only ever about the quiet agreement resting gently behind it. If you have made it this far tonight, drifting somewhere between waking thought and quiet sleep, perhaps some small coin from this long story is still resting softly in your mind. Perhaps it is a lion stamped in ancient electrum, or a stone too heavy ever to move, or a bean once mistaken for a fortune. Whichever image lingers, let it settle now, quietly, like a coin sinking gently through still, calm water toward a soft and sandy floor. There is nowhere else you need to be, and nothing else you need to carry, only this last, slow, settling thought. Let it rest there now, gently, as sleep continues to draw nearer. Tonight, we have wandered together across a very long road, from cattle grazing quietly in ancient fields, to shells carried across oceans, to gold stamped with a lion's face, to paper trusted purely on a government's word. Through every single step of that long, patient journey, one quiet truth remained exactly the same. Money was never really about metal, or paper, or even numbers glowing softly on a screen. It was always, from its very first shell and its very first coin, simply a story about trust, passed quietly, gently, from one hand to another, across thousands and thousands of patient years. And that, more than any gold or silver, is the truest currency humanity has ever known. If you're still here with us, drifting somewhere between waking and sleep, thank you for spending this quiet stretch of time with the Sleepy Economics channel. There is another video waiting for you, whenever you're ready, filled with more slow and gentle history to carry you toward rest. If tonight's journey helped ease you toward sleep, consider leaving a like, subscribing, or sharing a quiet comment below. It helps this small channel more than you know. For now, let your jaw soften, let your shoulders sink a little deeper into the bed beneath you, and let your breath grow slow and even. Picture a quiet room, a single dim lamp fading gently to darkness, the whole world settling softly into stillness around you. Sleep well and good night.